There are a lot of Assassin's Creed games, and for many years Ubisoft was pumping out games every single year, so it's not surprising that consumers can't play them all. Some games slip through the cracks. Assassin's Creed Rogue is one of those games. But why would this game be overlooked? You play as an assassin that defects to the Templar Order. It builds upon the ship combat in Assassin's Creed 4 that a lot of people enjoyed. Well, the answer is simple: Assassin's Creed Unity. Assassin's Creed Unity was presented as the next step for the franchise, and on the brand new hardware of the time. Ubisoft was kind enough to not leave the last-gen players behind, so they announced Assassin's Creed Rogue to come out a few weeks prior, but Rogue was delayed to the same day as Unity's release. So the first problem is that many gamers, myself included, couldn't afford both games, so they had to choose one. As I'm sure you can imagine, many chose Unity because it completely overhauled the series. The allure of the next generation of Assassin's Creed was enough to overshadow Rogue. But do you want to know what happened when Unity and Rogue released? Fucking Pandemonium. Unity not only got most of the press because of its promises, but it was the talk of the town for how butchered the release was. I swear, this one screenshot is more popular than the game itself. All of the eyes were on the dumpster fire taking place in Paris, so the story in the North Atlantic kept a low profile. Everyone was so caught up in Unity that they forgot about Rogue. The result of this was Rogue earning the reputation of being underrated, and wrongfully so. See, Rogue isn't underrated, it's just overlooked. Because general consensus when the game launched was that it was Black Flag 1.5, and while repetitive, was just as fun as its predecessor. Upon closer inspection, we can find that Rogue's strengths and weaknesses are defined by the rest of the series. Its entire allure is a novelty, and the specific ideas presented feel underdeveloped, especially when prior games had executed the same ideas better. This doesn't mean Rogue is bad, because it truly is just as addicting as the rest of the series, but the game reeks of untapped potential, especially in its story. The fact many called it underrated and sang its praises is now more confusing than ever, to the point where I consider this game to be one of the more overrated Assassin's Creeds. What isn't overrated is today's video sponsor, Wanted Dead. This old school throwback is brought to you by a brand new publisher, 110 Industries, and developed by the team behind beloved titles like Dead or Alive and Ninja Gaiden. And they're back with bullets, katanas, and spectacular enemy executions. Wanted Dead is a true love letter to the PS3 and Xbox 360 era games, offering an 8 to 10 hour single player hack and slash experience. In this game you play as Hannah Stone, a Hong Kong police lieutenant working in a special government team to uncover a corporate conspiracy. How is this done? By pulling the trigger on your gun, pulling the guts out of an enemy, and dealing with no loot boxes or battle passes because this game is microtransaction free. All of the aforementioned is under a slick late 80s cyberpunk coat of paint. The gameplay sees you shooting at enemies from afar with your customizable guns and closing the gap to engage with a katana combat that has devastating combos incorporating your sidearm. It's also a game that doesn't take itself too seriously, as any of the minigames here will prove, but it can also take itself seriously enough when it wants to, especially during the boss fights that cap off each level. While this game is a power fantasy once you get into the flow of things, do beware that this game will kick your ass, and quickly too. So, I'm sure you've already got the captivating allure of a one-of-a-kind game, Wanted Dead, but I have fantastic news for you. Act quickly, as Wanted Dead is available at an astonishing 50% discount on both Xbox and PlayStation. The sale will run until July 25th on Xbox and August 2nd on PlayStation, and if these platforms are not your preference, then you can also find it on Steam and the Epic Games Store. So don't miss out on this hot deal, and get it using my link in the description or the pinned comment, and thank you to 110 Industries for sponsoring this video. So what is this novelty I mentioned? Well, Assassin's Creed Rogue does not see you playing as an assassin for most of the game. Rather, you play as someone on the other side. Shay Cormac is an assassin that, through repeatedly witnessing assassin incompetence, loses faith in the Order. And this culminates in him betraying his brotherhood and joining the Templars. It's through switching sides that we receive the benefits of the Templars, but it's also where we see Ubisoft's inability to let us be the antagonists, and God forbid they challenge the ideology of the quote-unquote bad guys. Rogue is a short game, and while I won't take issue with its length, I will take issue with just how little it says during that time. I can at least appreciate how quick the game is to pick up where Black Flag left off. Also, spoilers ahead. Rogue's opening is one of the best in the series, but it's also one of the worst. It's great because things move quickly and everything is presented under the assumption that this isn't your first rodeo. Likewise, this video will go on the assumption that you've either played Black Flag or have seen my video on it, which will be linked below. The tutorial can be flown through and present Shay as already being a Templar, but perfectly faking out the player, as this is merely your training. Shay's training, like ours, is viewed through a new lens because of who we are using these techniques on. There's also the poetic way Shay's first and last assassinations are on Liam. We are swiftly introduced to our cast and reminded of the ship mechanics, and by now you might be wondering why this is in some ways the worst opening. And the answer is that while you're in the middle of enjoying the game, you are ripped away to do things in the modern day. You're forced to reboot servers because there was a virus in your Animus file, and you'd never guess how you do that. iPad games. You're an iPad kid, and the game has the gall to say that you can continue exploring your office.
With the servers back online, you could, in theory, restore your co-workers' workstations if you know, Feel like being helpful?
Yeah, fuck no, baby! When we do finally jump back in after being so rudely interrupted, we find a gameplay loop nearly unchanged from Black Flag, which I don't entirely mind. The mix-ups that are here are appreciated, and I'd argue that in some ways this is the best of the naval warfare. And of course, the sea shanties make a return.
Captain! Aye, you smell like you farted. Farted? Haha, good one, lads!
The Morrigan has a few tricks up its sleeve, notably the puckling guns, which are essentially a fully automatic variation of the swivel shots and the burning oil. Burning oil replaces the fire barrels, which now allow you to coat the water with fire, dealing solid damage over time to any ships hugging your rear. The puckling gun allows you to shoot weak points, but the real convenience this weapon brings is when boarding. Ultimately, there is some grinding in this game as there was in Black Flag. It doesn't always feel like a grind because the gameplay is so dynamic and the grind is optional, but the point is that when you are boarding tens of ships to maximize the materials you get, you'll be having to jump on, slaughter 5 to 15 men, and while the combat is fun, it's not that fun. In Black Flag, you could shoot a few enemies with a swivel shot while you waited for your ship to get close enough to jump over. But now, with the extra ammo offered by the gun, you can complete a boarding without, well, boarding. It just made the plundering more efficient, though the grind this time around does not hide itself as well as Black Flag did. The prime suspect for this is the bounty hunters and wanted levels. The bounty hunters in Black Flag would begin chasing you after you boarded a few innocent privateers, and the wanted level increased rapidly, and was decreased through boarding a ship. This worked because it made the grind more varied and implemented risk. The longer you went, the more bounty hunters and thus loot would come your way. Skilled players were rewarded with a constant stream of high-level ships carrying tons of goods, and those grinding for fun had a mechanic to play around. Your bounty would not go away unless you boarded a ship and selected that option, or you died. Sometimes you'd have to run away from the hunters, but here, your bounty naturally dissipates, and at a rate that ensures that only those wanting man-o'-wars on their ass would be receiving a ram up the rear. The result of this change is a lack of consequences. In Rogue, you can bully other ships more efficiently than before, but with little consequences or reward. Not having a constant stream of bounty hunters delivering goods to you means that not only is this grind longer, but it's less interesting. What's worse is that the bounty hunters have greater depth here, as they can, on occasion, board you, which temporarily turns the tables. Final nitpick about boarding ships, while it is enjoyable, they nerfed the rope swing. In Black Flag, you flew down from the top ropes, clearing an easy 50 feet to the opposing vessel, but here, you get no distance. So it just means that a haphazard boarding results in a lot more waiting, unless you want to take a dive. Regardless of the gameplay changes, this will all feel familiar, but it won't look familiar, at least not all the time. Shay has a few new animations during takedowns, as well as sharing a few with Edward, and the environments this time around are beautiful, most of the time. There's a slight issue with the palette of Rogue, or perhaps the color grading, but the cities look far more washed out and desaturated. I assume this is because many sequences take place in the North Atlantic, where much of the screen is blizzards and ice. However, this sword has another edge, which is that when the game wants to give you color, they give you color. The Aurora Borealis bleeds a heavenly glow over the skyline to the point where it distracts from nearly everything else. I just wish there was more of this beautiful color to be found. But Rogue was not interesting for its visuals, though when compared to Unity, the game runs like butter. Rogue is interesting for what its gameplay could provide. When playing as an assassin, we get reminded of the tools. Hidden blades, secret bureaus, and covert stealth is key to our success. Our minds can quickly run wild with what the other side has access to. We know the Templars have access to more resources, companions, connections, and you'd be incredibly surprised to find that Rogue presents the Templars as being a lot like assassins. While in goals that may be true, in execution that could not be further from the case. At worst, Shay should be incorporating his assassin training into Templar affairs, but what I had hoped for was a new Templar approach. For example, instead of assassinating someone, we would have more bribery, politics, and internal organizing. Instead, the game does everything it can to keep you doing the same things as before, but now the colors just change. And you know what? While we're talking about it, what fucking crack was the team smoking when they decided that the assassins were going to use the color orange for their organization instead of white?
But Aqua, white would be hard to see.
Exactly. Make them blend in. Make them hard to notice. The orange sticks out like a sore thumb and makes them not even look like assassins. Hell, most of the assassins you meet barely wear their hoods, let alone the proper attire. Anyways, let's take a look at the missions here, and we'll see that after an incredibly long introduction, your goals do not change. It is only the characters and set dressing that do. To illustrate my point, I'd like to discuss one of the side missions in Assassin's Creed Brotherhood. There are multiple Templar bases around Rome that must be taken over, and this is done by entering the hideout, taking down the leader, and interacting with something atop the highest point. Now here's the thing, I lied. This is more or less what you do in Rogue, and it highlights a fundamental problem. There should be no liberating in this game. The Templars in almost every Assassin's Creed game are winning. They have control over the region, they have the resources, they have the powerful people in their pocket. Shay has nothing. In fact, Shay has less resources than many assassins before him. Ezio in both Brotherhood and Revelations was able to create an army army from the ground up, and Shay gets a single quartermaster to accompany him only on the waves. An interesting alternative to the gang hideouts would be infiltrating bureaus. In the first Assassin's Creed, you found bureaus through discovering the assassin insignia somewhere and finding a secret entrance, often roof-bound. Here, it can be interesting to see a bureau area, a vicinity where the Templars think there's a bureau, and then we have to investigate the surroundings to find where it is and how to get in. Once inside, we can have a contained dungeon of sorts where we have to get to the end to discover some plans and of course take down a bunch of assassins along the way. The only reason I can imagine they didn't do this is that the team was not given the ample budget or time to try something new, or Ubisoft is so stuck in their Assassin's Creed formula that creating anything outside of that golden template is virtually impossible. While we're on the topic of hideouts, I want to talk about the actual assassins. The assassins stalk you from the shadows, rooftops, benches, and bushes. If you get close enough to them, they will attack, both revealing your location and dealing damage. You can counter the surprise attack, but the ideal means of dispatching them is to beat them at their own game. You have a few tools to achieve this, namely the whispers and pink screen tint that accompany their presence. Eagle vision also lets you find where they are. Ignoring the fact that Stevie Wonder could spot these people in a crowd, this creates an interesting dynamic where you must observe your environment more. You'll begin to notice just how often you aren't looking up, but this mostly translates to an annoyance more than anything else. If I want to complete an objective, I'll find myself sighing when I hear those whispers because it means I have to abandon my objective briefly and look around at hiding spots to find the stalkers. If you discipline yourself and restrict the use of eagle vision, then it's a bit better, but again, these enemies don't do much that's new. If the assassins were in disguises, trailed the player for a bit before attacking, and we had no way of essentially highlighting where they were, we could have one of the most tense Assassin's Creed games on our hands. We would have to always look over our shoulders, analyze an NPC's movements, and perhaps if we assassinate the wrong person, then we'll give away our position, having guards and assassins gang up on us. So basically, I want Among Us. Seriously though, these issues I've outlined are exactly why I seem conflicted on Rogue. On one hand, what is here is good. Where I find myself getting ridiculously disappointed is in what Rogue could have been and what it seemingly wanted to be. The best moments of the game, or most memorable, have nothing to do with the Templars. I love boarding ships, and I'll never forget the shock when a bounty hunter rammed my ship and proceeded to board me. But that is not exclusive to either side. The best compliment I can give the Templar exclusive content is that the outfits were nice. But still, even in combat, Shay uses the same old tools, like poison darts, rope darts, hidden blades, when it might be more enjoyable to equip a musket, a massive axe, or some other weapon that isn't entirely associated with the assassins. You can pick these weapons up, sure, but you're forced to drop them when climbing, making it something you can't carry for long. It's also worth considering that a large portion of this game sees you as an assassin, and that wouldn't be a problem if the game wasn't so short as it is. This idea that you aren't doing anything new is easily seen as well in the modern day. Look, I'm sorry, I know you guys are fans of the series, and I've done a lot of hating, bitching, and moaning throughout this video already, but the modern day story and gameplay in Black Flag and now Rogue is abysmal. Right when you get immersed in the story, you'll be pulled out of the game you wanted to play and be forced to play the game you don't want to. You walk around playing iPad games to access lore, and while the lore here is fine, having to complete these minigames is just boring. Genuinely, Ubisoft had the license for Tetris at this time, and they could have just slotted that in and it would have been miles better. Anyways, the point is, you're not doing anything different, and the only reveal at the end is that your superiors overtly state that they are Templars, which gee, who would have fucking guessed that? Once your hourly torture is over, you'll play through a short segment where we answer one of history's greatest questions. Who was in Paris? The answer is Shay, but we don't know why, or more accurately, the game assumes we don't. I wonder, when you had played this portion of the game, did you ponder what Shay could have been doing there, or was it immediately obvious? For myself, I knew what was coming, and I found the moments in Paris pretty pointless, to be honest with you. We know Shay and Chuck were going to cross paths, and these moments felt like an unnecessary tangent, at least until the end. If we had left the moment in Paris to the very end of the game, the reveal would have been much better, and the intrigue would not have come at the sacrifice of the game's pacing. I understand that this game was supposed to be released before Unity, but even given what we had known of Unity from the trailers, it was blatantly obvious. This doesn't take away from the finale being wondrous. Moving through Paris is surreal from this perspective, and we even see interactions between a young Arno and Elise through Shay's eyes. I also love the assassination of Hope, as the poison forces you to stealthily move through her hideout without stopping, making it a unique challenge that I wish we saw more of. I also can't not praise the precursor sites, as they look fantastic and offer some mild platforming challenges to keep them interesting. This is something all the Kenway games have done pretty well, but I love seeing this trend continue. The destruction of Lisbon is another moment I'm sure I won't forget. The beginning of it is underwhelming as you scale multiple parts of a cathedral in rather uninteresting ways. I find it difficult to make excuses because Assassin's Creed 2 had a near identical setup and yet executed it way better. Moving on, a multiple minute-long chase through a collapsing town is not only visually stunning, but also audibly horrifying. You hear people screaming, their children calling for their parents. Death invades your senses, and yet this moment is drowning in confusion, because the story Rogue presents is one that is terrified of making you the bad guy. The story story of Rogue is surprisingly short. This is something I don't often criticize, especially within the context of price, because equating price to length is how we get bloated games, but I want to slightly break this rule for Rogue, not because it fails to hit an arbitrary hour count, but because it is not long enough to fully explore its own ideas. Ideological density is an equal problem, but these two issues go hand in hand to create a game that lives and dies on its novel concept. Up until this point, plenty of Assassin's Creed games have challenged the philosophies of both sides, and specifically Assassin's Creed 3 and 4 made large strides for not giving a clear victor or correct ideology. 3 presented a conflict where, while Connor was the good guy, and by association so were the Assassins, the Templars were not exactly wrong in what they wanted ideologically. The individuals who wielded the Templars' power may have been corrupted, but the goal itself, best represented and expressed through Haytham, was not entirely wrong. Both sides fight for the same thing, a brighter future, but the two sides go about it in different ways, and that is what defines them. A game like Rogue needs to show us at a deeper level what defines the Templars, and why one might choose to operate with them over the Assassins. I'd imagine that Shay might have grown up in a neighborhood that was unregulated, leading to misfortune towards him and his family and driving a lack of faith within the individual, now advocating for the control of the population that the Templars seek. The explanation we actually get is that the Assassins in this game are fucking psychopaths, eventually. At first, the Assassins are relatively likable, but the moment the group heads to Lisbon is where the game completely falls apart. We begin the game doing work for the Assassins and seeing a wavering faith within Shay as he's ordered to assassinate someone who is already so close to death. Shay also becomes frustrated at the lack of any assassin negotiations with the Templars. All of this makes sense. As we progress further though, we encounter both Adewale and Achilles, which I loved seeing, but more importantly, Adewale informs us that Port-au Prince has fallen, shortly after Ade was there investigating a piece of Eden. When Shay is sent off to Lisbon to investigate a piece of Eden of his own, the piece causes the town to suffer a devastating earthquake, killing thousands of innocents. Shackled with guilt, Shay drags himself back to the homestead with the realization that Achilles likely had knowledge of what really happened in Port-au Prince, and knew that Lisbon would collapse. Shay is then furious with the Assassins. The Assassins don't listen to Shay, they don't offer any explanation and are intentionally vague. It all seems as though Shay is the only one out of the loop. And upon an attempt to steal the precursor box capable of showing the Assassins the other precursor sites, Shay is caught and chased down by the Assassins. Shay does not kill anyone on the way out, but when confronted on the edge of the homestead, he is shot dead amidst negotiations. The Assassins in this entire encounter, and then for most of the game, are ridiculously irrational. All Achilles had to do here is explain to Shay that they weren't sure what was going to happen, and that they did not intend to kill all those people. Instead, nobody in the Assassin Brotherhood will hear Shay out, let alone try and help him. This is not exclusive to just this scene. Throughout the game, the Assassins make buffoons of themselves so that Shay can have an undisputed antagonist. When being cornered at the edge of the homestead, not only does nobody try to explain to Shay what happened, but he is actively shot by one of the Assassins when he was already cornered with nowhere to go. It's after this point where we wake up in New York after having been nursed back to health by an elderly couple. Then the Assassin-affiliated criminals break in and harass the couple. After Shay helps them, we get tutorialized with the gang hideouts and introduced to some Templars who are incredibly kind-hearted and are morally correct, hence Shay's affiliation with them. Something many misunderstand is that Shay does not necessarily align with the Templar ideology. He simply finds that he can do the most good with them and aligns morally, at least in most cases, and that is a fatal error. The story forces you to be the good guy, and it means framing things like renovating homes as something the Templars are doing to help people. Shay, when meeting Monroe, is shown that the Templars want to help the citizens by building them shops, which is beneficial to us because we get a share of the profits. I'm so glad the Templars are doing such a noble act, except this has been something almost every other assassin does. Ezio paid for practically half of Rome and Constantinople, and Connor built an entire homestead along with liberating many parts of New York. The only reason this is here is because the game needs us to agree with the Templars. You might think that throughout the game Shay will encounter more assassins who challenge his view, or have any view challenged, but that is far from the case. Instead, we kill our former brothers and sisters as they continuously meddle in affairs the assassins would otherwise never do, like chemical warfare! We lose a few allies along the way, notably Monroe, who held the precursor box, and we get officially welcomed into the Templar Order by none other than Haytham himself, whose portrayal throughout the game is nothing short of disappointing. Haytham's character was already done great justice within Assassin's Creed 3, and as far as Templars go, Haytham is in many ways a morally just person, but here is as bland as a 2x4. The setup was done. We just needed him to be a fun gentleman bastard. Haytham accompanies you in the later ventures, and even with his very rigid beliefs, I still feel like the assassins are better Templars than the actual Templars are. When encountering Adewale near the end of the game, he begins speaking like a Templar would. A classic Templar cliche, one that nearly every target of this game commits, is telling you that you're too late or that they cannot be stopped. Adewale tells Shay that he's too late, and the way he speaks of Achilles' plan is the same as a villain would, and that's because they are villains, and that's the problem. In every other game, the assassins' goals are to free the people, and they achieve that through freeing slaves, killing those who want to control humanity, and only those who must die. Do you know how they achieve those goals within this game? Flattening towns, creating large-scale poisonous gas factories, aligning with criminals, and being incredibly reckless. Something that becomes more apparent as we progress is that the Templars knew more about Shay than they had let on, and that they were more or less manipulating him. It's revealed that the Templars knew of Shay's assassin origins, but were confident that he was not a double agent. And you can make the argument that the reason Shay only encounters the most morally correct of the Templars is because the Order wanted to manipulate him into turning on his brothers, and even if that is the case, it does not change the fact that the assassins are, to the bitter, crippling end, insufferable. When Shay takes down 2 assassins that were acting as a distraction, a ridiculous tactic mind you, he catches up with Liam and Achilles, where after inspecting the artifact, come to the conclusion only now that Shay may have been right. This throws a wrench in one of my earlier criticisms because I had said that the assassins knew that moving the artifact would have caused the earthquake in Lisbon, and that is what Shay had believed. But Achilles realizing that Shay was right could mean that he truly didn't know what Shay was going to find in Lisbon, or it could be interpreted as Achilles revealing to Liam that Shay was right all along. If we go with the better faith interpretation, then it means Achilles didn't know what Shay was going into, and still did not bother trying to hear out what he was saying, or God forbid, say that he didn't know people would die, and I don't know, show remorse? What's worse is this exchange.
This whole calamity could have been avoided if you'd only listened to me. Disrespectful to the end.
How is Shay being disrespectful, like, at all? And after all Achilles has done to have him killed, why would he be respectful? But this is not as bad as it gets, because after Liam attempts to shoot Shay, Achilles pushes him into the device that he knows will cause an earthquake, causing the temple and most of the island to collapse. Of all the places you could have pushed Liam, you choose there? After we kill Liam, we have a final encounter with Achilles where we convince Hatham to not kill him in a rather intelligent move, as he can now report back to the remaining assassins that these sites are not to be tampered with. As the game closes, we see Hatham ask Shay to track down the precursor box, explaining that it could take decades to find, and Shay accepts. It's there that we exit again to the modern day where we are officially indoctrinated into the Templar Order with essentially a gun to our heads, and we see the results of Shay's efforts in Paris. After killing Charles, the game officially ends. The story of Rogue is a frustrating one because it positions the assassins as indisputably bad, and rather than deconstruct both sides, as the game and more importantly reviews would have you believe, the game is deathly afraid of making our protagonists wrong, so it muddies the defining traits of both sides. Some could argue that the reason the assassins act the way they do is because they don't. Assassin's Creed Liberation, part of the Kenway saga, has a twist, which is that Abstergo discovered a way to render their own versions of history within the Animus, hence why the game originally ends with Aveline becoming a Templar. You could then presume that Shay's story is heavily modified to make the Templars seem as morally correct as possible while doing the opposite for the assassins. This explains away most of the criticisms with the assassins' actions in the game, but personally, I feel like believing this is huffing enough copium to pass out from a lack of oxygen. Outside of these frustrations, the story can be enjoyable, especially in small doses, but Ubisoft thinks the phrase, "I make my own luck," is far more clever than it actually is, because holy hell does Shay never stop saying it. It holds no significance to the character, and in fact, the whole reason this game happens, Shay being saved by the old couple, is because of dumb luck. Or did Shay somehow manufacture that? I mean, especially later in the game, he says it twice within like 5 minutes of each other. It's brutal. Okay, I'm starting to nitpick here, but ultimately Rogue leaves me incredibly conflicted. On one hand, it's an extension of Black Flag, one of my favorite games in the series, while adding some quality of life features. The ziplines and remixed lifts give situational variety to movement, and while some of the more undesirable features from Black Flag carry over, like the glitch that disables you in mid-combat, it's worth it when the naval aspects are as fun as ever. It's in what Rogue attempts to add that ruins the product, because every idea is either poorly thought out, makes no sense within the universe, or is simply the same thing as before but with a new coat of paint and a half-assed excuse. Assassin's Creed 3 examined the conflict from within. Black Flag did so from an outside perspective, but where does Rogue land? In a different argument. I don't know what Rogue wanted here. Was it to see which side is morally correct? Well, assuming our morals align with Shay's, then the Templars are right, but this is after the assassins act entirely out of character, rendering the argument pointless. Maybe the idea was to deconstruct both sides, in which case this game fails. In Assassin's Creed 3, we saw the best discussion of what the assassins and Templars wanted since the first Assassin's Creed, and it was just two people talking. This game could have shown through gameplay, a wider story, or through the world what those ideologies mean, and they don't. I watched a fair number of reviews for this game from when it released in hopes that I might have missed something, but so many critics cited the game's fresh perspective or playing as a Templar as reasons the game's good, and I just don't see it. Hell, one IGN review even says, Rogue has the most interesting story of any recent Assassin's Creed game. It's fascinated by its own history and introduces a level of ambiguity which changes how we look at the formerly simple conflict between Assassins and Templars. The best we get as far as a new perspective goes is a bastardization of the Creed and an attempt to make the Templars morally correct in nearly every scenario, because God forbid we think for just a second that we might be the bad guy. As far as gameplay goes, it's a palette swap and little more. Is the game fun? Yeah. I know I've been rather negative through most of this video, but the reason is because this game has a lot of potential that was left unmet. But what is here, despite being pulled directly from Black Flag, is fun. The movement is still fun, the sailing just as much, and everything in between is good enough that I get distracted. Hell, during a recording session, I had to play through just the main campaign, but spent nearly an hour doing legendary ship battles because they are simply fun. Furthermore, I gladly did almost all the side content and collectibles because again, it's fun, but it can't save my disappointment. Overall, I'd recommend Rogue. If you like Assassin's Creed, it's more of that, but lower your expectations, because this game is not underrated, it is overrated. Its entire selling point is no more than a novelty, and while in retrospect it is a shame that Rogue was overlooked, especially given how poorly Unity was received, we don't need to embellish the game's good qualities to make up for what is ultimately Ubisoft's fault. Developing two games to release initially within weeks of each other, but eventually within hours, was guaranteed to divide sales and leave one reeking of being second to Unity. It's funny. Had either Rogue or Unity been scrapped and the other team just worked on one game, either could have been better off. Unity would have run better, or Rogue's ambitious story could have seen some better direction. Instead, what we have is a game and more importantly a vision that is much like how the Templar and Assassin ideology is presented in the game. Half-baked.
We got a #1 victory royale.
Yeah, Fortnite, we about to get down.
10 kills on the board right now.
Just wiped out Tomato Town.
My friend just got down.
I revived him, now we're heading southbound.
Now we're in the Pleasant Park Street.
Look at the map, go to the mark sheet.
Take me to your Xbox, but
Play Fortnite today,
you can go Misty Meyer.
but not Loot Lake.
I really want to.
Chug jug with you.
We can be pro Fortnite gamers.
Hey everyone, thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, you can leave a like, subscribe. Thank you to our patrons who are on screen right now. If you want to support the channel directly, you can do that over on Patreon and you'll receive some benefits like getting videos super early and getting some more benefits I'm trying to work on hopefully soon. The audio quality sounds a little rough because the acoustics of the room I'm in are very poor because I just moved and I currently am sitting in an office with my desk and nothing else. So yeah. It'll take a few weeks for everything to get set up, but I just wanted to say thank you, because without your guys' support, I would not be able to move into this new place that I'm in. You know, I don't know if any of you guys are familiar, but living in Vancouver is super expensive, and I don't necessarily have the option yet to go somewhere cheaper. So I really appreciate all of your support. You guys have changed my life. Thank you for watching. You can follow me on Twitter for more video updates. You can join the Discord server to chit chat about games, and hopefully more videos will be coming soon. The move was why it's been a while since the last video, because I had school ramping up. I'm going to be starting the honors program at my university, so I kind of had to get a bunch of stuff put together for that, the move, and it was just like I had no time to make videos. But now things should be a little more smooth. I should have more time, and I'm eager to get back on the grind. So until next time, take care of yourselves. Take care of each other. I love you guys. Stay safe.